all thought coding disappeared. We didn't need coders anymore. But I believe there's more ads for coders now in the United States than ever before. This AI doomsday scenario is way overblown.
Yes.
Way overblown. And who should be concerned? That top 0.1% of the global population. I do believe AI in education will be the great equalizer.
Is the system still steering them toward the very careers AI is set to make the riskiest? "10,000 graduates, one warning about AI, then the booing started. The man at the podium, Eric Schmidt, Google's former CEO, booed for telling them AI would reshape every profession they were entering. A generation furious about its future. My guest answers that fear from 3 chairs at once. Dr. Navin Valrani educates 3,000 children, sits on the board of Penn's Graduate School of Education, and employs 14,000 people. On which careers survive, he isn't speculating, he's deciding. So I put forward the questions I'm asking myself. Is university still worth it, or is it better to build something of your own? If you go, what to study and where, and which careers the next decade will reward? Questions this big deserve more than a soundbite. So in this episode, we will discuss them at length. Dr. Valrani, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Armaan, for having me.
I'd like to begin by asking you to revisit the moment a mentee of yours, Adit Palicha, informed you that he would not be returning to Stanford. Zepto, which is a unicorn company headquartered in India, already had some traction at the time, and he was staying back to build it. Where were you, and what was your response?
So a few things here, Armaan. So Adit, my interactions with Adit, who is obviously a very successful entrepreneur at this point, were prior to him making that decision of not continuing his higher education. They also revolved around actually his admission into college. I started interacting with him also on one of his very early entrepreneurial ventures, which was a bus pooling app here in Dubai. But you also have to remember, if I remember the time correctly, that we went into a pandemic. So several students were reassessing whether they should be going to college in that environment, given that it was a remote environment. And I believe Adit was one of those. And again, I can't speak for him in the decision-making process. But the conversations, I can assure you one thing, that whatever interactions I did have with Adit, he was highly determined to go to university at the time. Probably one of the most determined students I've had in terms of taking the next step, the next typical step, let's call it, in going from school to university.
Now that's a topic we'll touch upon once again later on in the episode. And moving on to, I assume, the reason many of you are watching today or listening in. In one fortnight, graduates booed a former Google CEO and then a UCF commencement speaker off the stage for simply saying AI will reshape their careers. Is that anger justified, or is it a fear of a future they do not quite understand?
I believe it's neither. So interestingly enough, I was the graduation speaker at 2 different events this year. And in both, I did not mention the letters AI. I think the booing comes from, firstly, this typical crowd effect, to create a significance when you are amongst people without any real rationale. I don't think we need to overthink, do they believe in AI? Don't they believe in AI? Are they misguided about the future of AI? So I think there's part of it is that. The other part, I believe, is just that it's so typical. Like, here we are in this pivotal moment in our life, about to start a new chapter, and all you can tell us is what we read in the press every day, what we hear every day. So please be more creative if you're a graduation speaker. I think that was the message. And I don't think we need to overthink it that, they don't believe in a world without AI, or they do believe in a world with AI and they're concerned about their jobs. I believe we're overthinking that booing that took place.
Then if you had been at that podium, either of those podiums, or you had mentioned the word AI in one of your commencement speeches, what would you have said in response to the crowd as they booed?
I would bring humor into my speech at that point. I'd put my hand up and say, okay, I messed up. Let's move on. Almost crack a joke at the time. Let's talk about a world without AI. Just to sort of get the audience re-engaged. But I do think that the AI story as sort of a next phase of life and the impact it's going to have on society is way, way oversaid and overstated, not only in graduation speeches, but even otherwise.
Part of the reason I imagine students are feeling this way is that students are being punished for using AI in class while these same leaders celebrate it on stage. Is this sort of double standard justified? And how do you personally draw the line at Arcadia without becoming the hypocrite they're describing and they're jeering at?
So, it's an interesting question, but what we're comparing here are students who have finished a 4-year university program versus students at school, and they're very, very different.
Yes.
So I don't think that's an entirely fair comparison. So there is no doubt in any rational individual's mind that AI is here to stay. And when you say AI, I mean AI was there pre-LLMs, but AI in how we refer to it in the current form. I have no doubt, and I don't think, as I told you, any rational person does. I do believe that the leaders who are standing up and speaking against AI potentially are the same ones actually potentially using AI. And I think that, again, we're not being fair to those leaders, particularly in a school context, because part of a student's journey in school is to ensure that we give them foundational skills to succeed in life. And you may say, look, AI is a foundational skill now. Yes. But at the same time, we have to give them skills of discussion. We have to give them skills of literacy. We have to give them skills of numeracy. Can AI do all of this in some way, shape, or form? Of course it can. But can we have this conversation if I wasn't educated and developed to learn how to speak, to even learn how to think? And so I think the comparison's not fair. So at school, the objectives are very different. They're also about, in a relatively controlled environment, creating the culture where students can actually interact with each other, where social skills are developed, where emotional development happens. That's quite tough in a pro AI environment. I'm not saying there should be no AI. But in a pro-AI environment. So I think when we bring schools into the picture, we're talking about a completely different cup of tea. But when we are talking about universities, I do think the train has left the station there. AI is very prevalent. There are professors who have embraced it, and there are those who have embraced it, but have also said, this assignment, yes to AI, this assignment, no to AI, and there are those that are still saying, you know what, we don't want it until we know more information. And I think those are really the three buckets where professors lie. So I don't believe. So when university officials say, no AI, and I don't believe they're actually saying that. But I also think that we have to look at the specific context behind the statement.
Which bucket would you say you've fallen into?
In terms of the school?
Yes, in terms of Arcadia.
In terms of Arcadia, so we and I believe that AI is here to stay. That's number one. We believe that students should have skills in AI, in generating efficient responses, in improving personal productivity by the time they get to university. However, where we're struggling, and I believe I can even speak to my fellow educators, is in the realm of assessment. So there are areas that we want to continue to assess, where when we bring AI into the equation, it becomes difficult to understand if the student has really learned what we would like them to learn. So that's where we're struggling in assessment, but I do believe that piece will also be solved over time. I'm not quite sure how, but I do believe it will be solved over time. So I do think, just like, when my parents were growing up, an open book exam was an unheard of concept. It was introduced sort of in my generation, and now it's quite commonplace, right? You can have open book exams. You know what? Here are the formulas. You don't need to memorize the formulas. Just like that, I do think also the access to AI will happen during assessments when appropriate, and that phase is coming. You have to remember, this is quite a recent development, right? The advent of AI to this extent. So we're still learning. So I think we have to give educators a little bit of a break here.
So I would conclude that you've been relatively hands-on and forward-thinking in terms of implementing AI in your school, Arcadia. Assuming I were, and I think there is plenty of educators and CEOs of schools who have taken quite a pessimistic approach and are essentially waiting for the dust to settle in terms of AI adoption. What would you say if I were one of those educators or CEOs?
Who are taking their time?
Who are staying neutral.
Who are staying neutral? I was doing a training session yesterday with a group of individuals who were relatively naive in the use of AI. When I say naive, what was their use? Personal use on ChatGPT. And I shared with them 3 platforms that I use in order to improve my own personal productivity and in order to have more effective outcomes for students. And I told them at the start of the conversation, look, we can take positions on AI, right? Ethical positions. I don't believe in the use of AI because it's bad for the environment. But the fact is, as I said earlier, the train has left the station. And I will be mighty surprised if that train goes into reverse gear. So I would tell my fellow educators, it's happened, it's coming. And if you don't prepare your students in the use of this very powerful tool, you are actually doing them a disservice. And I would be quite firm with that. I do believe students need to now go into university knowing the power of these LLMs and all the associated tools that have been developed as a result of them. Not all of them, obviously, but at least those that are pertinent to improving their own productivity and also to coming up with solutions potentially to bigger challenges.
All right. I'd put my cards on the table. I'm with Mark Andreessen, who, for those who are unaware, is an incredibly prominent and well-renowned American VC investor. His Techno-Optimist Manifesto, which he published back in 2023, makes the case that AI makes individuals and teams more powerful, meaning more entrepreneurship, less work. I think it's already minting a generation of solopreneurs. Jeff Bezos has made the same point very frequently as of recent, that the barrier to building has never been lower than it is today. The critics would make the case that it quietly hollows out the entry level and hands the gains to whoever owns the capital. You're rare in this debate. You employ 14,000 people, not just theorize about them. So tell me where my optimism is naive. Across your own workforce, which roles need fewer humans in 10 years, if any, and which do not change at all?
So, really good question. Of course, crystal ball question. So I think the roles that won't change are the ones that require some form of physical labor. These could be expertise that are, for example, a chiller technician. Will that be replaced by a robot at some point that's AI driven? Yes. But at least for the foreseeable future, I haven't quite seen anything that can replicate the level of a master chiller technician. When a large chill water plant is down, you want your experts to go in and resolve the issue and get the air conditioning back up and running. In places where some manual labor, where automation becomes tricky because it's not available in mass, those customized manufacturing, very specific, very intricate, handmade watches, right? The fact that they're handmade, by definition, there's not much automation involved there. So that type of segment, which still has a place, will remain. Jobs where you need a form of empathy. Now, AI chatbots are very empathetic. Don't get me wrong, right? I think there's very few people left, at least in my ecosystem, who have not used an AI chatbot when they're ill and it doesn't make them feel better, right? So they are empathetic, but I don't believe they will ever replace the human touch that that goes far beyond just an interaction. Now, what I mean by a human touch, let's say on a very small level, your mom's homemade food. I don't believe, now, an AI robot can potentially make exactly the same food, maybe even better, but it won't taste as good. So those are the little things, and they're very emotional. It's a part of your brain that also needs developing. I believe those type of roles and jobs will remain. In the teacher there, particularly as you go, in the early years and the primary years, those teachers are the most secure in my view. As you get into secondary, the teacher's role will change. I don't believe the teacher will disappear from the class. So if there's one teacher in front of the in the class walking around, there's still going to be one teacher walking around. So I don't think jobs will reduce there, but it will change. In many cases, it will be about facilitating learning and not, dictating learning. Which jobs, 14,800 employees, which jobs are going to go? And that's a really, really good question. I do believe that there is now a race for individuals, particularly I see it more in the finance profession, to say we are masters of AI and therefore we deserve for our jobs to be kept. So I think there's a race right now of learning AI tools because people have realized that in order for them to retain jobs in the future, at least the near future, they need to be on top of this. So what I'm seeing, and sort of from my vantage point, is a mass adoption of AI tools. People are investing their own dime in training themselves so that they can, when they show up to a meeting where the boss is present, they want to be able to say, I use this, and this is my output, and this is my analysis, and this will help you make this decision easier. So I do believe at this point, I don't know how many jobs will be lost, but I do believe that there is a race amongst professionals and professional, many of them are super smart, right? And they know they have to invest in themselves to stay ahead in this game. Now, as much as, we always like to look at loss of jobs because it makes sensational headlines. But just like all the technological revolution, innovations that have happened before this, there will be a set of new jobs 100%. That get created.
Yes.
And no one, of course, I do read about it here and there, but it doesn't make the headlines because it's not sensational enough. And I think that's where the focus needs to be. What are the new jobs that will come out? So let's look at the big tech, the ones who are at the forefront of this, and let's ask them, okay, what are you short of right now? So we all thought coding disappeared, right?
Right, yes.
Coders. Why do you need coders anymore? But I believe there's more ads for coders now in the United States than ever before.
I saw David Sachs, the AI and crypto czar, post he published on X a couple of weeks back, which he said the amount of commits on GitHub has risen by 14x, I think, since the beginning of last year. And with that, the number of job postings for software engineers has in turn. And I think it adds credence to what you're saying perfectly.
Yeah. I think this AI doomsday scenario is way overblown.
Yes.
Way overblown. I mean, what, we're 30 year into this now?
Yes.
Right?
About 3.5 years into it.
Has anyone really lost their jobs?
You don't hear of it. You don't hear it as much as you hear the likes of Sam Altman and Dario Amodei telling you that the unemployment rate will be 50% in 2030, who are essentially talking their own book at the end of the day. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you've previously mentioned on a podcast that over the past couple of years, your finance team at Al-Shirawi has actually grown. And what it seems to me you're describing is a significantly more competitive landscape for jobs going forward. And there's a term I heard recently on a podcast, which was bring your agents. So it's essentially a prerequisite in a competitive landscape similar to the one you're describing, whereby as part of your credentials, as part of your CV, what AI literacy skills and which custom agents of your own, which are tailored to this role, are you bringing with you? In terms of Al-Shirawi's finance team, for instance, since that's one you've mentioned, is that a trend you've noticed? Has the finance team simply grown with the workforce, which I imagine has grown relatively rapidly over the past couple of years? What's your take?
What we found with the finance team is that they've grown due to two reasons. Number one, obviously, there's the growth of the whole organization. But the finance team has grown in terms of pure numbers, at a lower rate than let's say, top-line revenue growth. The other reason the finance team has grown is because of increased compliance requirements. You have to remember, just a few years ago, we had no taxes in this country. Now we do. So there's an entire tax compliance side. But what we found is while we've grown because of the reasons I've just outlined, the number of finance professionals that we need are not even a fraction of what we would have needed if we didn't have these AI tools. So the AI tools have helped tremendously in meeting the increased compliance requirements and in meeting the growth rate that we're enjoying thanks to the growth of this nation.
Now, I'd like to move on to the university degree and its importance in this landscape we're discussing. Now, you sit on UPenn's board, hands down one of the most respectable institutions across the globe. Yet you say we don't go to university to learn, we go to become adults. Elon Musk goes further. A degree is often unnecessary, and if you want to start a company, there's no point finishing college at all. In the age of AI, is he right? For the would-be founder, is university now merely a detour? And doesn't that gut the case for the institutions you help run?
This is a long topic, and we can go on for a long time. Learning, as we learning can come in different forms. And learning doesn't necessarily only have to pertain to the world of academia. Going to university is a holistic experience. It is about learning in the classroom, but there is much more learning outside the classroom. It's about building friendships. It's about understanding who you are and potentially finding your meaning, the purpose of your existence. There is a whole philosophical side that you can potentially discover at university. If you are going to university with the sole objective of setting up a startup from the get-go and making money because it is for some reason a measure of what we have historically defined as success, you're going for the wrong reasons, in my view. Every student should be, and university, college, vocational school, just the next step of life, it's about growing intellectually, growing spiritually, growing emotionally, growing physically, learning how to live life. And that the university apparatus that has been created globally does this the best, in my view. Now, I have obviously a lot of respect. I cannot question Mr. Musk, but the fact is, it's easier to say this when you've been to university. I think, and again, if I recall the statement you made, he said, if you want to do a entrepreneurial startup. But life is more than just wanting to do an entrepreneurial startup. Life is about creating beautiful relationships. How are you going to learn that? Right? Do we feel kids graduating from school at the age of 18 are ready to build serious emotional relationships? For the large part, no. And they need to go to a next phase of life, be that university or something else. Could look like something else, but there has to be another phase as that emotional maturity comes in. And you get to a point in your life where you begin to seek things that, money's important, don't get me wrong, but you begin to seek things that go far beyond money. And I think where the challenge lies is that we have defined a human being's success in the eyes of just pure money. And I think that's where the fundamental problem is with the question, right? Mr. Musk is saying, if you want to do an entrepreneurial startup, you really don't need to go to university, don't need to graduate from university. I agree with him. I don't disagree with him. But does that mean you should not go to university? No, because there's many other pieces, which I do believe if I ever get into a conversation with Mr. Musk, if I have the good fortune to do so, he would agree with me.
So you'd say the development of some of the softer skills, they're called. Of
course. Life is about creating memories, right? And don't get me wrong, part of those memories are connected to the professional space, but a large part are created to what happens outside of that professional space. You can create the biggest startup in the world. It can go on to be a unicorn, and you can be super successful from a money perspective. But then when you turn 50, 60, and you look back and you say, am I really successful? It's not an easy question to answer, right? So success, the word success needs to be dissected.
And you run a college counseling firm while calling US admissions broken, which, could I please ask that you expand on? Do you believe you're fixing or feeding that same very system?
Great question. So the context which you refer to, the U.S. admissions system is based on a principle known as holistic review. And the intentions behind that system are pure and I agree with completely. The challenge with that is there are several pieces to that system. So one is the academics, which is pretty much consistent across all jurisdictions. The academics matter. Then, in order to further validate those academics, there are some extra assessments. I do believe that is unnecessary.
Standardized testing you're referring to,
Correct.
right? Yeah.
Because a student should be seen, and this is the intention behind the system, within their high school context. And if that high school context does not lend itself to tests like the SAT, I do not believe a student should be compelled to do so. So that's another side. A third side is looking at sort of the personal qualities. And I do believe that the intentions behind this are very pure. However, an entire prep industry has been created as a result of it. I think we have to think of better tools in order to determine what are those personal qualities of the student who is applying. And the best for that is actually the school itself. And again, the universities ask for a counselor recommendation, they ask for teacher recommendation, so they're doing a lot of that. I think what needs to disappear, if I had a voice in this matter, is the personal statement, is the writing. I would rather them see, how is this student performing in the context of their school? How is this student performing in the context of various classes? But to then go and get essays written, which take laborious time, and many of them times these essays interact with exams and assessments, so the student, the well-being of the student is not being considered, and that's where my challenge comes. And just to answer your question, am I feeding the system? On the contrary, I'm saying to the student, take care of yourself. Let's see how we can mitigate this stress that either you are facing or that's coming your way. And so that's what prompted me to get into this, is really this mission that we need to do a service to students. There's so much going on in your world right now, right? There's so much information hitting you. And I don't think it's fair then to pile up university essays and extra assessments beyond what the school does. I mean, you've been through the GCSE system. You have to do over 20 exams at the end of year 11, or what's known as grade 10 in the United States. And after that, we've got to worry about the SAT? Come on. Right? So it's those type of things that bother me. And I'm actually, I've entered this industry to be really a voice saying, let's draw some lines here. And to help our students.
I'm currently reading a book published very recently by Bill Gurley. It's titled Running Down a Dream. He found that nearly 6 in 10 people would have chosen a different career path had they been given the chance, and he argues the safe paths parents push most, such as law, medicine, computer science, are the ones AI is set to reshape most. You've educated thousands of students. Is the system still steering them toward the very careers AI is set to make the riskiest?
It's not. I can speak for Arcadia. I can't speak for other schools. I'm deeply involved in the career counseling department at Arcadia, and I spend a considerable amount of time there. The first big sort of point here is I don't believe Bill Gurley is doing a justice to the word career. No student should be graduating school thinking they will be stuck in one career for the rest of their life. That world is gone. It could happen still, but I think now we're heading into a world with multiple careers. Look at me. At the age of 45, I went from a corporate life to an educator's life. Who gets to hit the career reset at 45? Right? Not normal. But this will become the norm. And so what I tell students is, let's not talk about a career, let's talk about the next step in your journey. When you graduate college, what's the next step? And it should not be the final step. you should always be ready to pivot, particularly if you haven't found meaning yet in what you're doing. And eventually you will. You will. And it can come at a very late age in your life. So I do believe that Bill Gurley, and again, I haven't read the book, so I apologize if I didn't understand what he said, but we should not be talking about careers in a long-term fashion. We should be talking about what is the next step in your life. Now, if you want to be a lawyer, law is one of the examples you gave. If you want to be a lawyer, you have to, if you're going to the UK, you have to, take the LNATs. If you're going to the United States, and before law school, you've got to take the LSATs. I think what needs to be highlighted is the student needs to understand, I'm going to put a lot of effort to become a lawyer, but I may not end my journey of multiple careers being a lawyer. So do I want to put this effort? And lawyer, law is a beautiful profession. So, I have nothing against that profession, but there's a lot of work that goes into being a lawyer and a doctor that students need to be aware of in a world where we're going to have multiple careers.
Now, touching upon the book one more time, on the very first page, a quote by Steve Jobs at Stanford, which is mentioned, is, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." This is the gospel of the idea of stepping off the conveyor belt, as Bill Gurley describes it throughout his book. But most people my question to you is, do you think entrepreneurship is innate, or that for the majority, the structure and safety net that comes with a corporate job, being a subordinate, taking direction, is actually where they will thrive? Or is that just fear dressed up as realism? So is entrepreneurship innate or not?
I think different courses for different horses, right? Is entrepreneurship something that you are born to do? No. Is the professional life your North Star? Could be not. Living someone else's life, it's really interesting because Eastern cultures, where the meaning of a family unit is very different to what we see in typically see in Western cultures. People are living their lives for others all the time. And I don't look upon that necessarily negatively. I mean, this sounds great in a Stanford graduation speech, right? Don't waste your time living someone else's life.
Yes.
But the fact is that I don't see a challenge when a child, or when a son or a daughter is pursuing a path in order to make their parents proud of them. That could be defined as living someone else's life. But it is a very normal concept in Eastern societies. So I think students need to be careful in defining boundaries that typically come from Western contexts. They don't always apply to their own context. So I would encourage students, look at your own context. Understand what your values are as a human being and try your very best to stick to them. Because that's when you will be happiest. And that's when you look back at your life one day and say, I am successful.
Circling back to something we touched upon earlier in this discussion, this is a question I wanted to ask you, and I'd actually prepared beforehand. Your doctorate studied why some teachers embrace technology while others resist it. What surprised you most during your research and the dissertation as a whole? And does it explain why so many adults are scared of artificial intelligence now? And as part of that, take me back to one teacher in your research who surprised you. What did they actually do?
So I'm glad you asked me this question because with most research, there are surprises, particularly when it comes to findings. And when I did my research, the surprise was not the use of technology within the classroom. There was plenty of competency, plenty of capabilities in the settings that I went into. Where the challenge was actually the power dynamic within the classroom. That was my most surprising finding. What do I mean by this? So I was looking at the early years, and 3 adults in the classroom because of the age grouping, and the 2 adults that were lower down in the hierarchy when it comes to technology use might have actually had a higher skill set than the teacher that sits at the top of the hierarchy within the classroom. But guess what? Due to cultural factors, such as respect, they wouldn't speak up. They wouldn't say, I know how to do this. I know, in today's context, how to use AI. Right? Because you know what? I respect you. You are my teacher. You are my superior. And I will never, ever question you and never, ever try and feel that I'm showing off, because that's not what my culture is. So you have to ask me before I offer that, before I demonstrate what I can or cannot do. And that was the most surprising finding, that power within the classroom was connected to culture. There's certain cultures where hierarchy means a lot more than others. And the respect for hierarchy means a lot more. And that was really the most surprising finding. So there were people at the bottom of the chain who had amazing technology skills, who were setting everything up, getting the hardware in place, getting the infrastructure right, but would be reticent when it comes to demonstrating that in a classroom environment, and would actually even wait for the teacher to leave before they come out with their skills. That was the most surprising finding.
That's incredibly interesting. And on that topic, Alpha School in Austin, Texas, says 2 hours, and has proved that 2 hours of AI tutoring per day puts children in the top 2% and has them learning more than twice as fast as their peers, 2.6x to be precise. Musk, referring to him again, says we run children through grades like an assembly line, and says that people are not objects on an assembly line. You run upwards of 3,000 students on year groups. Can AI-paced learning actually break that assembly line at real scale, or is it a number that falls apart when actually implemented inside a school?
No, I do believe that AI in education will be the great equalizer. It will be, for as long as education has been in place, the North Star has been to individualize learning for every single student within the classroom. There's no reason that you should be learning at the same pace as the person sitting next to you, in any which way, shape, or form, given that your abilities are different to theirs. And I believe AI will solve this issue in customizing and individualizing plans for each and every student. It will also provide access to learning in ways that has never ever been dreamt of prior to this. The world, can now access LLMs. What does it take? An internet connection? So, and that's potentially now coming from space in the future. I do believe AI will provide us that North Star. It will be the big solution to this challenge of individualizing education and providing access to all. I think we're on our way. And who should be concerned? That top 0.1% of the global population that has had access historically to the best schools, the best teachers, the best tutoring, the best prep, the best home environments. Guess what? AI is coming. And in my view, it is the great equalizer. And I'm actually looking forward to it.
That's a very interesting point you make on AI leveling out the playing field in terms of education. Now, I'd like to discuss online learning. When the regional conflict a couple of months ago shut down schools across the UAE as well as some other schools in countries in the Middle East, I found that my learning and my intake was significantly better than it was in a conventional classroom environment, contradictory to the narrative that schools were essentially instilling in children and my peers. Sure, there were certainly students who struggled in the online learning environment and thrive in a classroom environment, that I found it to be profoundly better. And I took in much more in all my classes. My attention was significantly better. What are your thoughts on online learning? You've said that students came back after COVID for recess and for the corridors, not the lessons. So be honest with me. For the learning itself, is online learning underrated? And if it is, how do you strike a balance?
So as you know, we were in touch during that time.
We were.
And I was extremely impressed with how well you were learning in a remote environment. Not all students, in fact, just from sort of what I was seeing from my vantage point, the majority of students were not learning well. And why was that? It was primarily coming down to a focus issue, not because the teachers weren't teaching well. I think the teaching was of a very high standard, but it was because a device, by the very definition of how it's turned out to be, you can be constantly distracted by notifications. So students were not having the discipline to sort of turn off notifications like I have done during this conversation. And were continuously being distracted. My guidance on that is if you were the gold standard, let's say, other students need to get there. And why? Not because remote learning was going to be the mainstay for the rest of their school career. No. I did know we were going to go back at some point. What I wanted students to understand, that you are heading into a world where remote learning, remote meetings is going to be the norm. So if you cannot focus for a 50-minute school period, you are not going to be able to focus for a 2-hour meeting. You need to acquire this skill set of focusing in a remote learning environment. It is critical. And the conflict that happened with schools going remote was a golden opportunity for students to be able to pick up that skill. You did. You know now, right? Yes. I mean, COVID was a while ago, right? You were much younger. You really kind of didn't know that, look, am I really good at this or not? You kind of had a feeling, but this was the test. So if there was an assessment, you passed with flying colors, right? Remote learning assessment, student-wise. Where, again, I feel we missed the opportunity because I wish that we, across the city, had evaluated remote learning effectiveness, student by student, when you came back. We had a baseline when you left, and we had, you came back after 6 weeks of remote learning. Where were you? Instead, what I was seeing and hearing from my peers, many teachers were reteaching the content.
That's correct. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You're smiling because you know that was happening to you. And I was like, we've lost the opportunity. We lost the opportunity. What an amazing opportunity, particularly with students of your age, right? You are a year or so away from university. There's going to be remote learning happening at university. There's going to be meetings. You're going to have job interviews remotely. You're going to walk into your first job and there is a high probability Your employer will hand you 2 screens and a keyboard and a computer and say, go set it up at home because you're 2 days remote. 3 days in person, 2 days remote. It's happening.
And you think that would be a fair balance?
In terms of the 3-2?
Yes.
I mean, that's a different topic, but do I feel that's a fair balance? I feel we shouldn't set any boundaries on remote versus in person. Every organization knows what it takes to make them sustainable and successful. And if that means that people can work in a remote environment, so be it. Why would you create these boundaries? I'm very confused. Adults create all sorts of boundaries. And I very often question the rationale behind those boundaries. Like, why? Why would you say that everyone needs to be in person? Like, demonstrate to me data on why that should be. And yes, you could say, yeah, but it's not fair because there's certain jobs that have to happen in person. Yes, but that doesn't mean the whole society has to be in person. So I do believe that we had a golden opportunity. I do believe students like you thrived, and you were a minority, but you thrived. You are ready for the world that you are going into when it comes to remote learning, remote working. I think most students and educators missed out on the opportunity.
To conclude, since we're running out of time here, this podcast, I'm establishing a new tradition, which is that each and every guest will leave a question for the next. That's my inspiration was the Tim Ferriss podcast. Now, I know you've been very vocal about the fact that since you were a child, you've been a cricket fan. You've been an avid follower of cricket. My next guest, who I'm scheduled to sit down with in 2 weeks from today, is a very well-renowned cricket player. I'm sure you'll be aware of who he is, which I won't mention on the podcast. What's that question that you'd like me to put to him?
Okay, I need to ask you a question in order to get my question right.
Okay.
Is he a batsman or a bowler?
Bowler.
Okay, perfect. I'd like to ask him about the Kookaburra ball. There is a ball, we can do some research on this, which has a smart chip in it. That smart chip provides a lot of data to the assessors, the umpires. When this ball was invented, AI wasn't a thing. So it was standard, chip. It picks up certain qualities, speed, noise, and it transmits it to what we call a third umpire, who, in the event of a dispute, gets involved with the decision. So, firstly, obviously, what do they think of the Kookaburra ball? But if, given the theme of your podcast today, and I'm assuming that's also going to come up with this cricketer, how do you see AI playing a role in the cricket ball? Because there is a smart ball today, and it's used in professional cricket games. Cricket has gone far, far ahead, in fact, much further than football. And it's got this chip in it. And I'd like to know what the future of the cricket ball is.
I'll put that question to him in the next episode.
It's a tough question.
Yes. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Valrani. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation and all of the insights you shared with us today. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Armaan. I loved our conversation. I look forward to many more.
Thank you all for listening.